quick, some background about myself. Grew up in Alabama, up in North Alabama, right up close towards Memphis, and was a golfer from really before I can even remember. My parents started playing golf around the time I was born, and so we were all beginners at the same time. And I have some pictures of myself when I was a little kid, holding a left-handed 6-iron. So I know that my first club was left-handed. At some point, I converted to righty. I don't know when that was, but it was before I can remember. And so my parents just played golf. They kind of fell in love with the game when they were beginners, and they didn't want to pay a babysitter when they played golf. Actually, I think they couldn't pay a babysitter. So they just took me to the course, and you just do what your parents do as a kid. So I just figured that's what people did. And so I just started swatting the ball too, and by the time I was old enough to get on an actual course, I could play golf. I could hit it kind of straight, and I could get up and down, I could putt, and I kind of understood it by the time I was like 6. And so we moved to a little town out west of Huntsville where I was born called Florence, way over by Mississippi, kind of shoved up in the corner of Alabama, and we joined this little private club. And we want to talk about a stretch, calling Florence Country Club a private club. Compared to some of the places we see around Atlanta, this place was like, and I say was, it doesn't exist anymore. It didn't survive the financial crisis. 2010, it became weeds. Mm. And so you had to be 8 years old to go on the course, and so I wasn't yet. I was 6. And on Mondays, when the course was closed, my dad would always take me out after work, and we would go out and hop the fence, the gate over the road, hop the gate and go and play the holes around the edge of the course, 1 through 3, 16 through 18, on the perimeter of the course. And I just wanted to try to beat my dad. And remember now, my dad was a big hitter 6 years before that. And so I think of my dad at that time as being like this, oh my gosh, I have to beat him. He's so good. He was probably like a 17 handicap. But in my mind, it was like, that's my dad, and he's good, and I want to beat him. So it didn't take me very long. My learning curve in golf at a 6-year age was like this, and his was like about like that. So it didn't take me very long, and soon I turned my sights to other competitors to try to beat besides my dad. But I started playing junior golf tournaments when I was 8. Played my first one in Decatur, Alabama, and I remember showing up to register at the table out front, and there was a kid crying. And it's a vivid memory in my mind that this kid was upset. And when I sat down at the table, I was kind of like, what's wrong with him? And they said, he's the other guy in your age group. So he thought he was going to be the only one playing, and therefore he was going to finish first. And so when I showed up and he found out I was in his age group, he was upset, and he did finish second that day. So he may still be upset. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him since. So that was kind of my introduction into tournament golf. And I wish I could tell you what I shot that day on 9 holes as an 8-year-old, but it was probably maybe around 50 or in the 40s. I don't know. But it was enough to take home the trophy. And but I just love playing. I wouldn't say I learned a lot about how to play golf from my parents because, like I said, they were beginners when I was. But I learned everything about how to love golf from my parents and how to respect it. And it just got its hooks in me. And I played other sports too as a kid, but really I was a golfer. I was a golfer, and I was the golfer in my little town. And so golf took me out of town to go to college. I considered going to Stanford and Georgia Tech and Auburn. Those were the 3 choices I kind of narrowed it down to. I had a lot of attention from college coaches. I remember being on my recruiting trip at Stanford, and a name that you may know, Nota Begay, I'm sure that name's familiar. He used to be a golfer, and he just recently turned 50, so he's kind of becoming a golfer again, but he's on NBC doing golf. So he was my recruiting host, and we were friends because we played in junior golf tournaments together. And I just remember being at Stanford, and I'm not going to tell you exactly what we did up until about 2 a.m. because this is a wholesome men's breakfast. But around 2 a.m., I remember laying on some bench and looking up and just kind of staring into the stars, and Noda was standing there and being like, I think I'm on Mars right now. I mean, from Florence, Alabama to Palo Alto, California, there is no chance I was going to go to college at Stanford when I was there. And Noda did a great job recruiting me, but there was no way I was leaving the South. And so Georgia Tech and Auburn kind of fought it out at the end, and I really liked Georgia Tech, and so that's how we ended up here. And my wife, we had known each other since we were about 14. We went to the same high school, and she went to Auburn, but when we were in college, we were like best friends in high school. Then we started dating a little bit when we were in college. And when we were 19 years old, we found out that we had a little one coming. So talk about a world being turned upside down. We had to consider everything, like where are we going to do, how are we going to handle this. And we had already planned to start a family later on, but that timeline wasn't exactly what we planned. So we decided to get married. We had our first one when we just turned 20, and we both graduated from Tech. She transferred up here, and so that really explains why I live in Atlanta, because of Georgia Tech and having my first one when we were in college. We were firmly entrenched in this town by the time we graduated from college, and we were not going anywhere. So we bought our first house in Smyrna, moved over to Gwinnett County in the late 90s, lived there for 20 years or more, and about 2 years ago we moved into Midtown. And we're so high up in this building, you can kind of probably see our condo building if you look that way. But one interesting thing about playing golf at Georgia Tech that many of you may not know, who knows the Standard Club up there in Johns Creek? So we're familiar with Standard Club. It was probably built, I'm going to guess, around like the late 80s, maybe mid to late 80s, okay? That's fairly accurate. Does anybody remember the original Standard Club? Okay, so right here, so everybody knows. So right on this very property is where the Standard Club was. And Georgia Tech Golf had a good relationship with Standard Club before I came in 1991. This was our practice facility. And when they closed the course and they built their new course, they sold off property, as you can imagine right here where we are in this town, pretty valuable property. So I don't blame them for selling it off. I don't know how good the golf course was, because by the time I got here in 1991, there was only 2 holes left. There was a par 4 over by the railroad track by MARTA that ran that way. And yeah, that's right, it ran that way. And there was a par 3 that ran this way. And it was just like exactly what you would think of when you think of a golf course that didn't exist anymore, but there's a couple of holes that stood there. The Georgia Tech golf team mowed the grass, and we raked the bunkers, and we kept up the place. That was our practice facility, but it wasn't the best facility. Like, the bones of it weren't the best, but it was completely private to us, and we could hit balls at MARTA. So, I mean, you think it's hard to hit like a par 5? That green's sitting still. You try to hit MARTA. So we had a good time over here. That was kind of my earliest memories of practicing golf when I was back in those days and young and a father, was coming over here for spurts of like 45 minutes and getting all my practice done in 45 minutes, and then leaving and going to like pick up Connor at daycare, or go home and tag team with Lisa while she went to work or she went to school. So I've got a lot of memories, some great, some not so great, from being over here. But when I plugged in the address this morning, I thought, it's funny, I haven't been back to this area in a long time, but I don't know what kind of hole ran through here, but this was all golf course property right through here. So anybody play it? Anybody play at the old course? Yeah, so we got some that played it. Good course? Pretty good? I see some shrugs. Okay. There's a par 4 and a par 3 over there that were pretty good. They upgraded. Well, the new Standard Club certainly is pretty good. Okay, so graduated from Tech. That was in 1995. Had an almost 2-year-old, and immediately turned pro. I had a good college career. When we found out that Connor was coming, we got married. That could have gone either way with my golf, and there was plenty of people close to me in my life who said it was going to go one direction, and plenty of people who said it was going to go the other direction. And so I had to choose who to put my invested, my relationships. I had to choose who to trust, and really it ended up where I was just. I learned how to be really efficient and really organized with my time, and I became an adult basically right away. And when I became an adult, my golf really, really got better. And my last couple of years in college, I was one of the best in the country. So I looked around, just like I did in junior golf. I just suddenly looked around and I'm beating everybody. When I got to college, I got beat by everybody, but then after a couple of years, when I was a junior and a senior, I was beating everybody. And so it was just a natural next step to go into the pros. And so in 1995, turned pro right after I graduated the next day. In golf, you don't really there's not a lot of fanfare when you turn pro. You just enter a tournament, and you these Monday qualifiers and these mini tour events. The prices. I mean, to play in a, you probably have maybe somebody or a friend of a friend or whatever has somebody in their family who's a mini tour player. Those guys and gals that play in those events, those are like $1,000 to $1,500 entry fees, and you don't make a lot. So those guys and gals are not making a lot of money, but they are grinding their way towards a place where they can make money. And so that's what I did for the first part of a year. Went to the qualifying tournament back then. Played terrible. Made it through all the stages and got to the finals. But when you make it through, when you play the first stage, the second stage, and you make it to the final stage in the qualifying tournament. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about 1995, not now. It's a little different now. The structure's different. But when you make it to the final stage, you've at least earned yourself a partial exemption on one of the tours that the PGA Tour runs. And so that was my goal that first year. I made that goal, and I started the year off in 1996 as the 13th alternate for the first Nike Tour event. Glamorous. But I had a big moment in my career that week because it was San Jose in the wintertime, and anybody who's spent time on the West Coast knows that it rains a lot. And I went out to go to the Monday qualifier to try to get in the field, and the Monday qualifier got rained out. It moved to Tuesday. Tuesday qualifier rained out. It moved to Wednesday. I was on the range on Wednesday, and the official who ran that, the local official, came up to me and asked me if I was Cink, and I said, yes, I was. He said, well, you don't need to play because you just got in the field. So enough players had withdrawn from the weather that I got in. Went on to finish second, lost in a playoff that week. And the way it works when you're in that conditional sort of partial status category is there's something called the reshuffle, where every 6 or 7 tournaments they basically reorganize everybody according to your winnings for the year. And I finished second, so I've shuffled. They call it, you shuffle up. I shuffled to the very top. I was in every tournament, and that put my career on a completely different trajectory. And I went on to win like the 5th or 6th tournament that year and finished first on the money list. That was in 1996. It's 2023, and I'm still on the PGA Tour. I don't know how to really explain all that, but that's sort of a nutshell of the career and the way it unfolded, the way I got started in golf. A friend of mine who I work with, a sports psychologist, he likes to say that we're riding a bull out there, and that's a lot like what it is. You get yourself ready, you prepare, you get tough, and you make yourself completely ready for everything, and you get on that bull and you don't know what you're going to get. And there's a lot of good players that got kicked off the bull for some reason or other, and there's a lot of good players who that bull was friendly. In 1996, when the rain came to San Jose and I got in the field and finished second, I got a good bull that week. And so it's just the way it is in golf. And so over the years, I've gotten some good bulls and I've got some really hard bulls. And but I've really enjoyed it. I love playing golf. Part of the reason I think that I'm still going and able to sort of kick around out there and, not just survive, but I've still got all the power I've ever had at 50. I think part of the reason is I just love it. I really love golf. It's an amazing blessing in my life. It's a tough puzzle to solve, and I like trying to solve that puzzle every day. It just drives me to try to leave no stone unturned and uncover things about the game that I may have missed, and I'm pretty thorough. So it's a full-time job. I treat it that way. It's a passion. It's a hobby. My wife says obsession at times, but it's a fun thing. So real quick, I'll back up and talk a little bit about what Mark asked me to talk about, which is how I handle like the spiritual side of my life. And that's the first thing I want to mention is that I am not good at handling the spiritual side of my life. I'm a human being. I'm flawed, and I'm basically frail. So I think anybody here identify with that? So I grew up in a Catholic church, but my family really was just sort of a semi-practicing Catholic family. We kind of hit the highlights: midnight mass, Easter, and then not even really sure if I knew where the Bible was in our house, if we had one. But not that there's anything against my family, but that just wasn't part of our life. And so by the time I was 16, I decided that going to work at the club, the now defunct Florence Golf and Country Club. Going to work at the club on the weekends was going to be better for my life than going to church on the weekends because I needed money for gas and dates and all that. And so I put my spiritual life, which was really almost non-existent anyway, just completely in the back seat. And it didn't have any part of my life at all until my son was born. So 1993, get married, Connor's born, and we started having conversations. My wife had grown up in a Baptist church, and she'd grown up, she had accepted Christ when she was pretty young, like 8. And so she was a believer and church attender, and that was her life. And so we both had strayed from our beliefs, or she had strayed from her beliefs. I didn't really have any. I mean, I heard of Jesus Christ, and I knew about the cross, but didn't mean anything to me. And so when Connor was born, that really, like I said before, I became an adult. And there was a guy that used to come and visit us from an organization called College Golf Fellowship. And at school, I mean, he came and visited. He was really tight with one of the guys on my team. He was a staff member for a ministry, okay? Kind of like FCA. And he would come and have lunch with us if he was in town. And one day we were sitting there, and I think it was about the time he knew that I was about to be a dad. Scared, my situation was about to change. And he turned to me and said, "Stewart, if you die today, are you going to heaven?" And I was like, "Yeah. Of course I am. I mean, I don't cheat on the course. I almost don't ever cheat in school. Nice." So, immediately I did the same thing that a lot of us would probably do when we got asked that question the first time, if you've ever been asked that. And you start immediately making this list and comparing yourself to, like, basically other people. Like, I know that guy over there, he makes pretty bad jokes, so he's probably not in good shape. But I don't do that often, so I'm probably better than him. So you start kind of like putting yourself in line. I had jury duty yesterday, and if you ever had jury duty in Fulton County, they line you up by number. And when I was in jury duty and they told us to line up by number, it's like, well, I'm 19. Who's 18? Who's 20? It takes a little while to figure that out. And that's kind of what I felt like I was doing when he asked me, if I die today, am I going to heaven? I felt like I was trying to figure out where I line up. And I learned not too long after that it's not all about where you line up. And there is no line. And so that's basically how I got started understanding what the cross was. I was in a church service in my in-laws, my new in-laws, who I already knew, my wife's parents. Like I said, we knew each other since we were 14. At their church, they lived in a little town outside of Florence, Alabama called Rogersville, which is like a dot on the map. I mean, it's like a red light and a barbecue joint, like a lot of towns up that way. And the church was, you could probably fit 12 of the churches inside this room. It was tiny. It was enough room for about 20 people. And the pulpit was like this tall, and the pastor, the preacher, was like huge. And he just like towered over everybody. He preached down. I swear he probably would drip sweat on the front row. But he was explaining, I don't even know what his sermon was about that day, but the way he explained the crucifixion and the way he explained how Christ took our sin and how we had no way of solving our own problems, and so Jesus was sent by the Father. The way he explained that to me, I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember like it was yesterday that I couldn't save myself. And the only way that I could save myself from sin, which was created way before my time when I was born, was through Christ. And so that moment really sort of tied together the question, if you die today, are you going to heaven? I wanted to run back to that guy and say, I know the answer. I know the answer now. But that was in 1995, I think. So it only took me, I'm a quick learner, it only took me 2 or 3 years to get there. But that was it. And, out on tour, I've now played on golf on the tour, on the PGA Tour for, this is my 27th season. And as you can imagine, traveling a lot and not being home a lot, it's kind of difficult to get plugged into our home church. Mark can attest to that. He probably hardly ever saw me at our church when we were there. But we go to church. We're regular attenders. But our church body, to a much greater degree, exists on the PGA Tour with our fellow believers out there. There's a fellowship every week, pretty much, every tournament, and it's on Tuesday nights, and we're regulars. And all of our closest relationships on the tour are at that, because that's where you can be vulnerable, and guys and gals, caddies come to it. There's a lot of people that aren't even related to golfers that come to it, but it's that's our home church, and that's where we do most of our spiritual growth in relation with other people, and we're just honored and blessed to have it and to be members of that. So it's a new chapter in my life. I just turned 50. I've got some opportunities that I didn't have before, which is nice. I'm not going to take advantage of those for a little while, probably here and there, but for the most part, I'm just going to stay on the PGA Tour. I love it, and I'm going to keep on going. And so, like I said, not a speaker. So from this point on, if it's okay with you guys.
Let's start off with this question. How's this?
Yeah.
All right. So I've noticed that you've had a unique situation with your caddies. It's very different than most people, and it's been in the sports writers are writing about it. So your son and now Lisa's caddying for you. Tell us a little bit about that, and having her traveling with you all the time. That's probably something different than it used to be, right?
Yeah, for sure. Living out there on the road, I was on the road alone almost 100% of the time for 12 years when my kids were between about the ages of 5 and 8 until they were out of high school. And so that was really difficult on my marriage, especially because my wife was just basically a single parent. And so one of the things we looked forward to during that time was one day she's going to travel with me, because she's always she never worked. She stayed at home with the kids. That was a decision we made early on. And so she was just like looking forward to that day. And so that day came, and well, she was just basically alone out there on the tour because I was busy. And I mean, it's a big business out there, and it's busy, and it takes a lot of time. And it's not just, hitting balls and having a cocktail. I mean, it's a lot. So she was pretty lonely. And, as an older person out there, we're outliers, especially now, are outliers. And so it's hard to really get relationships going when especially for her, when she's 25 years older than a lot of the gals that she's trying to, befriend. I mean, our kids' wives and their friends are older than most of the golfers' wives. So for a while there, I've had caddies, not too many, but I've had great relationships with my caddies. I've had about 6 caddies over the years. I had one guy for 14 years who we had a great run, but then the story with Reagan, Reagan, my son, he's my younger son. He was working for Delta during the pandemic, and apparently the pandemic affected the airlines pretty significantly. So he had just graduated from tech, and he had gotten an offer to start his full-time job after graduating. The pandemic started, and he actually got his job offer the day before Delta had their hiring freeze. So he was not affected by the hiring freeze, but his start date got seriously affected. So he was just sitting around waiting for a start date and didn't know anything. And there was a tournament. I had just come off an injury, a tournament in Napa. And Napa is a place that the caddies don't love going to because it's expensive. And my caddy at the time lived in Tennessee. It's kind of a hard place to travel to. And I was coming off an injury, so I was kind of on the borderline of whether I was going to get in the field. And so my caddy was asking me, like, give me an update. I need to do flights. I need to do hotels. It's expensive. And basically, to put it into perspective, when the caddies go to the tournament in Napa, your player needs to finish about 22nd or better for you to break even. And that's just not a guarantee. Not when you're caddying for a 47-year-old dude. So I could tell that my caddy was stressed out about it, and Reagan he's attentive, and he could tell, he knows the world out there. He knows the caddying and the player world. So he could hear the conversation, and he just said, hey, I'm sitting here doing nothing. I'll go caddy. If you want to just let your caddy off for the week, and I'll go caddy. I'd love to caddy. We played tons of golf together. He knows me, and he knows my game, and so I jumped at that opportunity. Well, we won. Finished first place with Reagan. And that was a tremendous experience for both of us. It was awesome. And so that poor guy, the caddy, I mean, it was just unfortunate situation for him, but he did caddy 2 more tournaments, but then really soon after that, I was like, Reagan, do you want to caddy for a while? And we've got some good relationships at Delta. So I called one of the guys who's the CEO at Delta and asked, I said, listen, your company offered Reagan a job after college, and he loves it. But Reagan has caddied for me, and he won a tournament with me, and he knew all this stuff. I didn't have to explain it. But basically, I said, look, Ed, if it was your daughters, what would you do? He's like, are you kidding me? Let him caddy. He's going to work for Delta for 40 years. Let him caddy, enjoy his experience. So it was really like heartwarming to hear that. I got the seal of approval from the CEO at Delta to have his employee and my son basically, giggle for 2 years, and he caddied for me for 2 years through last summer. It was incredible. It was probably my favorite time playing golf. And then I had another caddy after Reagan who was in an unenviable position because I was pretty much depressed for 6 months and didn't play very well, and I was just not myself on the course. And then that just sort of organically fizzled out, and I asked my wife to caddy for a tournament. She agreed. She has caddied before. She's caddied for a dozen times. And I really just enjoyed it, her being on the bag again, and she enjoyed it. She's already traveling. So she's caddying. Now we're going to go to the U.S. Open next week. She's going to caddy there. And for until further notice, my wife, Lisa, is my caddy. So
good for her. So that's fantastic. I saw some of the video, and I just, wow, that's awesome. You've got a great partner. I've got a great partner, Renee, back there. We do everything together also. So how is she received by the other caddies when she's out there on the course? It's got to be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, but I think that we've been around a long time, and I am pretty much a caddy at heart anyway. I love the caddies, and I'd pretty much rather hang with the caddies than the players. So I've got a great relationship with all the caddies, and they receive her very well. She's a sweetheart too, and she gets along with everybody. She understands that she's an outsider in their world, but she does a great job trying to do the caddy's role. I mean, it's kind of a dance with the player and caddy thing out there. And so she does her job. She does it well, and the last thing she would ever want to do is to be like a hindrance to anything. So she always rakes the bunkers. She knows exactly when to ask the other caddies, do I need to rake for you, and clean the player's ball. She's really good, and she can't really tell me if it's 7 or 8 iron very often. But as far as the caddy duties, she's excellent, and she knows me really, really well. So I have no problem being vulnerable with her and telling her, like, on a certain shot, like, this shot's got me like wigged out. That happens all the time. With other caddies, it's not always easy to kind of overcome that, that masculinity, and so it's good having her. I love it.
Now, do you have to pay her?
Well, one of the first things she always wants to look at is the prize money, so she can calculate how much she saved the family by me not having to pay a caddy.
That's great. She's a smart gal. All right, raise your hand, stand up, and shout it out.
Just throw your hands up, and
Yep.
we're going to go over here first, and we'll come back this way. I'm just going to summarize the question. Basically, I mentioned getting wigged out a second ago, and he basically said, for everybody in the room here, we probably all get wigged out at times, and how do we handle that, and especially from a spiritual perspective, considering our beliefs, how do we take that into our own workplace? Is that a pretty good summary? So I actually use my beliefs as more than, it's not just a belief I have where I believe it and then I set it aside and go do what I do. I use it like as a tool all the time to condition my heart. Because what I find is, since I'm riding a bull, the peaks and valleys are incredibly steep. And I'm sure a lot of people here can identify with that too. And what my faith helps me do is to iron out the valleys and the peaks. And it helps me just stay more even keel, because I feel like, I've not just that I've learned this on my own, but I've had mentors over the years who have helped me. That's one answer to your question would be, secure yourself a mentor. But for me, I was taught, and sort of like I gleaned from some of my mentors early on, that if you're out there trying to get results from work, then you are just, if you're a believer, you are just aiming way too low. Because in the end, are you going to look back and really fret over what you're probably fretting about right now? But you've got something waiting for you at the end, and also a relationship right now that is going to be just so much better than anything you can achieve at work. And so if you find yourself fretting, like, oh my gosh, what if I hit this ball in the right rough? Oh my gosh, what if I 3-putt? Oh my gosh, what if, just the list goes on and on. I just constantly remind myself that, number one, Romans 8:28 says God's basically got this, and he's entrusted me to do the work. I have a tank of resolve and experience and toughness that I can rely on in the tough times. And in the end, you're probably going to be okay. Yeah, I'm probably going to hit it in the right rough, and I'm probably going to 3-putt. And I just played the Memorial Tournament, where it was one of the hardest courses I've ever played in my life, and I made a lot of really bad scores. But here I am, And so you fret, and you realize, gosh, what am I really fretting over? We have something. When you look beside you, if you're like in a competitive workplace, you probably have something that the other people in your room don't have. So there's always reason to be joyful. I'm still waiting for that moment. I mean, seriously, one of the things that probably keeps driving me is that I just hope to one day be a successful professional golfer. Because golf is like you just don't ever conquer it. And so I feel like I'm so far from as good as I should be and can be. So, I mean, that's one of the things about playing this game is that the better you get, the farther you are from how good you think you should be. Does that make sense? A little confusing. But the better you get, when you're a 20 handicap, you're like, man, I think I can probably break 90 one day. But when you get to be the distance between 70 and 67 is so far. It's so far. So anyway, yeah. That moment for me probably occurred a little bit earlier than that, because right when I got out of college, I turned pro, and I entered a Monday qualifier. I left after graduation the next day, and I went to the airport and missed my flight.
Did it validate it for you, confirm for you?
Well, it was before that. Yeah, because I missed my flight on that first one. I didn't feel like a very successful golfer. And I went up to the qualifier in Cleveland, Ohio, shot 73, and it took 66 to get in. I wasn't a very successful golfer that day. And then my manager, my new agent, had come up there to meet me on the 18th green and say, I know you shot 73, but you just got invited to play in Hartford next week, which is on the PGA Tour. So I went to Hartford, and I made my pro debut. I'd played in the PGA Tour event before. I Monday qualified in college one time. And I made the cut, and I played with some big names, and I finished 18th, I think. And the next day, we had to get the paper and look at the earnings, because you couldn't do that online back then. And I went down and I saw that I made a check, and it was for $15,000. And I realized at that moment that golf can pay the bills. And I played with Marco Mira. I think we shot the same score the last day. I played with, guys who had been successful golfers, and my golf looked exactly like theirs. So that was the validating moment that I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my teeth kicked in a lot, but I'm also going to hold my own every now and then, and I can do this. So that was more the moment. By the time I got to San Jose, I didn't feel like I belonged in 13th alternate position. I was like, just give me a break. I just need a break. And I got the break. Yeah, the merger. I still have not fully processed the whole thing yet, but one thing I know is I trust our leadership. And Jay Monahan right now is getting kind of dragged through the mud, but I don't think it's going to be forever. I think Jay's going to come out of this looking fine. One thing, the guys, I've been constantly thinking to myself ever since Live Golf appeared, and by the way, I do not like Live Golf. Ever since it appeared on the scene, I've been asking myself, am I glad I'm 50 and kind of on the way out, or do I wish I was 25? And when this merger news happened, it just reinvigorated that question. I think I would rather be 25 right now, because it's going to be really good for golfers if you play well for quite some time, financially anyway. As far as the one, I'll address one argument that I've heard a lot that I don't like, and that's the whole blood money thing. As soon as that became the narrative on the PGA Tour, it really kind of made me sick, because of, as a believer, I have a standard of truth that I try to live by. I do a terrible job of living by it, but the Bible gives us a standard of truth, right? And in my beliefs, that is the one standard of truth. In Saudi Arabia, not many people agree with that. And they have their own standard of truth that they believe, and a lot of things that they do are deplorable to us. But to them, it's like what they should be doing, okay? And so when they look at us, a lot of what we do here in our country is deplorable to them. And it's deplorable to me too, as a believer. So when you talk about when you talk about the blood money scenario and how, you can't go and play for the blood and all that. You know what I'm talking about. To me, that just is wrong because according to whose standard are we? I mean, they're immoral. What they've done in the past is certainly immoral. What we do is certainly immoral. Is there such a thing as being more or less immoral? I'm immoral. I can't hold someone to that standard. And so I don't agree with that. I wish we could backtrack and take that out of the narrative, but it's out there. And I don't agree with what the Saudis do. I don't love the fact that money is coming from them into our sport. It's in a lot of things. And to be honest, a lot of our sponsors, probably every one, you could pick apart and find something that's immoral and you don't agree with. It's just a fact. So it's not our job to always take the high ground. Our job is to go into the workplace. Scripture says it, go into the city, but don't become like the city. So as far as the merger goes, I kind of wish I was 25. Oh, I can address that because I remember that pretty well. It was emblazoned on my mind. Without an accent, I just think that you've lived in the South too long to think I don't have an accent. Because wherever I go anywhere, they're always like, you're not from around here, are you? So I have an accent. My dad's from Colorado, so that's one thing. My accent's not as strong. I mean, where I grew up is what I like to call the hick center of the universe. I mean, it is. And I love it. But Rachel Bobo. Either her mom or grandmother was my third grade teacher. Yeah. Oh, Betty Bobo was my fifth grade teacher. Johnny Bobo, third grade teacher. Yeah. Yeah. Johnny Bobo, that's I.E. I think that was her grandmother. Yeah. Or aunt. Anyway, yes, funny. So how do we navigate those times? Well, our parents, both my wife and my parents, we didn't have a lot of resources growing up, so they did what they could to help us, but they pretty much were, they pretty much ran dry fast. And so we used everything we could as far as resources. I mean, I was on scholarship, and I wasn't allowed to have a job. Too many people had taken advantage of that and worked at like the car dealership for the big team sponsor and got like a whole bunch of money. And that was not available. My wife worked 2 jobs and graduated from tech, molecular biology degree. I don't know how that happened. But we kind of burned the candle at more than one end for a little while there. We took advantage of government programs. So when I was in college, right before I turned pro, we were on food stamps. We were on WIC, and they unexplained why, but they yanked that from us with like a year to go, and we just like limped across the finish line. When I turned pro, the day I turned pro, my bank account was in the minus $500. So we were not great financially. We did our best, and the way we just kind of navigated it every day was just like literally like took it hour by hour. And we tried to not starve, and we tried to keep our child alive, and we tried to keep our heads above water. My GPA kind of did this a little bit. Luckily, I didn't have that much runway, and so I was able to just get across, just in time before I really tanked. But no, it was a tough time for us, but it really became probably like a cornerstone for our relationship because we weathered a storm, and we felt like if we can handle that, then we can probably handle most things. And then life threw us a bunch of things we felt like we couldn't handle after that for a bunch of years. So we're both, I think, happy that those times occurred because of the way it solidified us. I was just not myself on the golf course, and when you're not yourself in the golf course, it's hard to compete against the best players in the world. And 70 just doesn't go very far out there when you're shooting, when you're playing golf against the best. And so what I call my depressed self, I could shoot 70. I mean, I could throw a couple of great rounds out there, but finishing 50th is just not that exciting anymore. So I probably should stop using the term depressed. But I would say that going back to what I said about how ironing out the peaks and the valleys is the biggest way that I handle the things in my life that are stressful. My wife got diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 43 years old in 2016. So stage 4 breast cancer, which she's going to be with forever, and she's doing great. But I mean, talk about like changing your life. She's at treatment right now, as a matter of fact. So 7 years ago, but stuff like that. Where do you go? I mean, once you have a template for knowing that you can't handle sin, I think it teaches you that you can't handle a lot of things that come your way, and there's only one solution. And that solution is to look forward and turn to Christ. And that's it. I mean, the New Testament, the Gospels especially, the New Testament, basically the message is it teaches how wonderful Jesus is. And how are you going to live your life every day if you believe that Jesus Christ is wonderful? That just changes the way you take every step. And so that really is how. Now, that doesn't help me very much necessarily when I'm like over a 4-footer that I really need to make. I have other like operational ways that I deal with that mentally, that's when I divide things in my life, in golf, into things I can control, things I can't control. And I set fire to the things I can't control, get them out. And the things I can control, I work my butt off to make sure that I can do those things. And in golf, because it's like riding a bull, there's a lot of things you can't control. So you got to set fire to a lot of stuff. And I constantly am burning things. And so the way you deal with pressure out there is to focus on things you can control. And that basically boils down to your process. And so every shot, every putt, every chip is like to me, a challenge and inwardly to see how well I can stay connected to the process and let the results be in that burning pile of trash. That's hard to do, but it's served me well.
Let's finish with this question because we're running out of time. Renee and I had the privilege of hearing you and Lisa speak a few years ago about your partnership with the Crisis Pregnancy Center. We were very impressed in what you shared. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it's important for men to be involved in those type of ministries?
Yeah, well, one thing I think that we've noticed over the years, like looking into people who've done this before us and people that are doing a great job now, is you kind of bloom where you're planted when it comes to where your heart wants to give and serve. And everybody in this room has something in their life, I know, that is meaningful to them, and it's probably quite diverse. In our case, because of the way that our family got started when we were in college, being a teenage pregnancy, by definition, 19 years old, we went, our first thing that we did, my wife and I decided to go and visit a crisis pregnancy center because we felt like we were in crisis. And it was over by Marietta somewhere. And we went in, and the counselor there kind of sat us down calmly and explained to us, like, I was in your shoes one time, and my husband and I got married, and we made it, and here's the options. She told us about every option. And it left us with this sense of peace, and she was a believer. It left us with a sense of peace that we're like, we were already planning to get married. We can handle this. This is right for us. Let's do this. And so from that point on, we just knew that was going to be one of our causes that we wanted to be involved with. We wanted to save little babies' lives and families. And so my wife became a counselor at a place like that in Gwinnett County for like 6 or 7 years, and she's on the board of it now. It's called Obria. It's a ministry, crisis pregnancy center. It's full women's health, everything. It's awesome. And so that's half of our foundation. Our foundation supports supports that, and the other half we support the NICU at Gwinnett Medical Center. So we're all about babies and mamas. But I know that everybody out here has their own things that they're for, and but it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is I think that you just get involved with it, because in the end, I mean, it sounds selfish, but you're the one that gets the enrichment from
Absolutely.
it. It's just so enriching to be involved with something like that. And so we're honored to do it. We had an event for a long time, but we during my wife's the heavy part of her treatment and us moving and becoming empty nest, we stopped that. So right now we're just kind of doing on our own stuff. Mm-hmm. But just whatever your heart says. Yeah, that's the main thing. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Big hand for Stewart Cink.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.